The wind carried the scent of damp earth as Emily Carter walked through the cemetery, her heels sinking slightly into the soft ground. It had been exactly 1 year since she lost Daniel. 1 year of emptiness. 1 year of aching silence. She stopped at his grave, her hands trembling as she traced the name engraved in stone. Daniel Carter. Loving husband. Gone too soon. A lump formed in her throat. She took a deep breath and whispered, "I miss you." A single white rose lay in her palm, delicate and perfect. She placed it gently against the cold headstone, letting her fingers linger. Then, a movement caught her eye. Emily turned her head and froze. A little girl stood a few rows away, staring at Daniel's grave. She was young, maybe 8 years old, her blonde hair falling in soft waves around her small face. Her dress, a faded blue, clung to her thin frame as the wind picked up. But it wasn't her appearance that sent chills down Emily's spine. It was her expression. She wasn't just looking at the grave. She was looking at it with recognition. Emily's heart pounded. "Sweetheart, are you lost?" she asked softly. The girl didn't answer. She took a step backward, her wide eyes locked onto Emily's. And then, she ran. Emily's breath caught. Without thinking, she hurried after her, weaving through the maze of headstones. "Wait!" she called. But the girl was fast, disappearing beyond the iron gates of the cemetery. Panting, Emily stopped, her chest rising and falling with quick breaths. The girl was gone. A sharp chill prickled her skin. Who was she? And why did she seem to know Daniel's grave? As the last light of the day faded, Emily wrapped her arms around herself, a strange unease settling in her bones. She had to find out. Emily lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. The image of the young girl haunted her thoughts, the way she had looked at Daniel's grave, the way she had run without a word. Who was she? Her mind ran through possibilities. A lost child? A relative of someone buried nearby? But something about the way the girl had stared at Daniel's grave made Emily's stomach twist. It wasn't curiosity. It was something deeper. By morning, exhaustion weighed on her, but the unease remained. She needed answers. After dropping by the flower shop to pick up fresh roses, Emily drove back to the cemetery. The air was crisp, the autumn leaves crunching underfoot as she made her way to Daniel's resting place. And then, her breath caught. The little girl was there again. She stood right in front of the grave, her small fingers brushing the headstone. Emily's heart pounded. This time, she wouldn't let her run. Carefully, she stepped forward. "Hey, sweetheart," she said, keeping her voice gentle. "You were here yesterday, weren't you?" The girl stiffened but didn't run. Encouraged, Emily knelt beside her, studying her face. Up close, she could see the girl's eyes, large and hazel, flecked with gold. There was something eerily familiar about them. Emily's breath hitched. Daniel's eyes. Her pulse quickened. "What's your name?" she asked softly. The girl hesitated, then whispered, "Lily." Emily swallowed hard. "Lily. Do you know my husband?" Lily glanced at her, then back at the grave. Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. And then, in a barely audible voice, she said, "He was my dad." Emily's world tilted. The air seemed to vanish from her lungs. Her hands trembled. What? But before Lily could say another word, a voice rang out from behind them. "Lily! What are you doing?" A woman stood at the cemetery gates, her face pale, her eyes sharp with alarm. Lily flinched. Without another glance at Emily, she turned and ran toward the woman, who grabbed her hand and hurried her away. Emily was too stunned to move. Her husband had no children. No secrets. No past she didn't know about. Did he? She clutched the headstone for support, her mind spinning. If Lily was telling the truth, then everything Emily believed about her marriage was a lie. Emily's legs felt like lead as she watched the woman pull Lily away. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "He was my dad." Lily's words echoed in her mind, clashing against everything she thought she knew. Daniel didn't have a daughter. He couldn't have. They had talked about children, dreamed about them, but he had died before they could start a family. So who was Lily? And who was that woman? Emily forced herself to move, quickening her steps as she followed them toward the cemetery gates. "Wait!" she called. The woman stiffened but didn't turn around. Instead, she tightened her grip on Lily's hand, urging her forward. Emily picked up her pace. "Please, the woman whirled around, her expression guarded. She was in her mid-30s, with dark hair pulled into a tight ponytail. Her sharp cheekbones and piercing eyes made her look intimidating. But it was the way she positioned herself in front of Lily, as if shielding her, that sent a chill through Emily. "What do you want?" the woman demanded. Emily's throat was dry. She glanced at Lily, who clung to the woman's side, avoiding her gaze. I need to know what she meant," Emily said, her voice unsteady. "She said Daniel was her father." The woman's expression darkened. "You must be mistaken." "I'm not." Emily took a step closer. "Why was she at my husband's grave?" The woman exhaled sharply. "We need to go." Panic surged in Emily's chest. "No. Please, just tell me the truth." For a brief moment, something flickered across the woman's face, hesitation. As if she was weighing whether to say something. Then, she leaned in slightly and said in a low voice, "Let it go." Emily's stomach dropped. "What?" The woman's jaw tightened. "Some things are better left buried." Before Emily could respond, she turned, pulling Lily along with her. Within moments, they disappeared down the street. Emily stood frozen, her pulse roaring in her ears. Let it go. How could she? Something wasn't right. And she was going to find out what. Emily sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. The encounter with the woman and Lily had left her shaken, but one thing was clear, she couldn't just let it go. Daniel had been her husband, the man she had loved with every fiber of her being. If there was even the slightest chance that Lily was telling the truth, then that meant he had kept something from her. Something big. Her stomach churned. Had he lived a double life? Had he been unfaithful? The thought made her chest tighten. No. Daniel wouldn't do that. Would he? She needed answers. With trembling hands, she pulled out her phone and dialed the one person she knew would be brutally honest with her, Maggie. Maggie had been her best friend since college. She had been by Emily's side through Daniel's death, through the endless nights of crying, through the days when getting out of bed felt impossible. The phone rang twice before Maggie picked up. "Hey, Em," she said, her voice warm but laced with concern. "What's wrong?" Emily swallowed hard. I think Daniel had a child." A beat of silence. "Then, what?" Emily exhaled shakily. "I was at the cemetery yesterday and today. There was a little girl. Maybe 8 years old. She told me Daniel was her father. And there was this woman with her, acting strange. When I asked her about it, she told me to let it go." Maggie cursed under her breath. "Are you sure she wasn't mistaken? She knew his grave, Mags. She wasn't lost. She knew." A long pause. Then, Maggie's voice softened. "Emily. Maybe you should talk to Daniel's parents." Emily's chest tightened. Daniel's parents had always been kind to her, but after his death, their relationship had become strained. His mother, especially, had withdrawn. Emily had assumed it was because of grief. Now, she wasn't so sure. Did they know? Had they been hiding something? Emily took a shaky breath. "I'll go see them." "Good," Maggie said. "And Emily?" "Yeah. No matter what you find out. I'm here for you." Emily closed her eyes. She wasn't sure she was ready for the truth. But she was about to find out. The drive to Daniel's parents' house felt longer than usual. The road stretched ahead like a path into the unknown, and with every passing mile, Emily's chest grew tighter. Would they tell her the truth? Or would they push her away like the woman in the cemetery? She pulled up to the familiar brick house, the one she and Daniel had visited for Sunday dinners and Christmas mornings. Now, it felt foreign, like a place filled with secrets she wasn't supposed to uncover. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out of the car and walked up to the front door. Her fingers hovered over the doorbell for a moment before she pressed it. The chime echoed inside. Footsteps approached. Then the door swung open, revealing Margaret Carter, Daniel's mother. Margaret's eyes widened slightly before her face settled into something unreadable. "Emily," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "This is unexpected." Emily forced a small smile. "I know. I'm sorry for dropping by like this, but I needed to talk to you and Robert." Margaret hesitated. For a moment, Emily thought she might turn her away. Then, with a sigh, she stepped aside. "Come in." Emily walked inside, her heart hammering. The house smelled the same, freshly brewed coffee, a hint of lavender from the candles Margaret always lit. But the warmth she used to feel here was gone. Robert Carter sat in his armchair in the living room, newspaper in hand. When he looked up and saw Emily, his brow furrowed. "Emily? Everything okay?" She hesitated. I need to ask you both something about Daniel." Margaret stiffened. Robert slowly put the newspaper down. Emily's fingers twisted together. "Did Daniel have a child?" Silence. Margaret's expression remained unreadable, but Robert's face paled ever so slightly. He opened his mouth, then closed it, glancing at his wife as if unsure what to say. Emily's stomach churned. "They know something." Margaret finally spoke, her voice clipped. "Why would you ask that?" Emily swallowed. "Because I met a little girl at his grave. She told me Daniel was her father. And there was a woman with her, she wouldn't tell me anything. She just told me to let it go." Another heavy silence. Robert rubbed his forehead, exhaling deeply. "Margaret." Margaret shot him a sharp look, then turned back to Emily. "Listen to me," she said carefully. "There are things about Daniel's past that are best left in the past." Emily's breath caught. "So it's true?" Margaret pursed her lips. "Go home, Emily." Emily's hands clenched into fists. "No. Not until I know the truth." Robert let out a shaky breath. "She deserves to know, Margaret." Margaret closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them, her voice was firm. "Not all secrets need to be uncovered." Emily's heart pounded. But one thing was clear. There was a secret. And she wasn't leaving until she found out what it was. Emily sat on the edge of the couch, her fingers gripping her knees as she stared at Margaret and Robert. The silence in the room was suffocating. She had always known Daniel's parents to be reserved, but this was something else. Margaret's face was tight. Unreadable. Robert kept shifting uncomfortably in his chair, his eyes darting between his wife and Emily, as if debating whether he should speak. Emily broke the silence. "Please. Just tell me the truth." Margaret sighed, folding her hands in her lap. "Emily, some things are better left alone." Emily's chest tightened. "I can't leave this alone. Not when there's a little girl visiting my husband's grave, claiming he was her father. Don't you understand what that means?" Her voice cracked. "Did Daniel have another family?" Margaret flinched. Robert pinched the bridge of his nose, exhaling deeply. Finally, Robert spoke. "We don't know everything." Emily blinked. "What?" Margaret shot him a warning glance, but he continued. "We only found out after Daniel died," Robert admitted. His voice was heavy with something Emily couldn't quite place: guilt, sadness, regret. "A woman came to us. She didn't tell us much, only that Daniel had been involved in something years ago. She asked us not to ask questions." Emily's head spun. "And you agreed? Just like that?" Margaret's lips thinned. "It wasn't our place to interfere." Emily let out a bitter laugh. "Not your place. This is Daniel's daughter we're talking about. How could you not demand answers?" Margaret's expression hardened. "Because we knew whatever it was, Daniel had chosen not to tell us. Or you." Emily's stomach twisted. She had always believed she and Daniel had shared everything. That there had been no secrets between them. But now, it felt like she had only known part of him. What was her name? Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Margaret hesitated. Robert answered. Her name was Claire. Claire. The woman from the cemetery. Emily felt the floor tilt beneath her. Margaret spoke again, her voice quiet but firm. Emily. Let this go. But how could she? Because now, she had a name. And she wasn't stopping until she found out exactly who Claire was, and what she had meant to Daniel. Emily drove home in a daze, her hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Claire. The name echoed in her mind like a whisper she couldn't shake. Daniel's parents had known something, but they had chosen to stay silent. And now, Emily was left with even more questions. The rain had started falling by the time she pulled into her driveway. She sat in the car for a moment, watching the droplets slide down the windshield, her mind racing. Who is Claire? Why did she visit Daniel's grave with that little girl? Why did Daniel never tell me? She finally stepped out of the car and rushed inside, dripping wet. The house felt emptier than ever. The silence pressed against her like a weight, making it hard to breathe. She moved on autopilot, peeling off her damp coat. Setting her keys on the table, until she saw it. A stack of Daniel's old things. She had been meaning to sort through them, but every time she tried, it hurt too much. Tonight, she didn't hesitate. She sat on the floor, pulling open the first box, searching for anything that could give her a clue. Photo albums. Books. Old birthday cards. Then, at the bottom of the box, she found something that made her breath hitch. A small, worn-out notebook. She opened it with trembling fingers. The pages were filled with Daniel's handwriting. Random notes, thoughts, reminders. And then, a name. Claire. Emily's heart pounded. She flipped through the pages frantically. The name appeared more than once, written in the margins, sometimes with small notes beside it. One of them stood out, I should have told her. Her throat tightened. She knew exactly who her was. Me. Emily's hands shook as she clutched the notebook. Daniel had wanted to tell her. But he never did. Now, it was up to her to find out why. And she knew exactly where to start. Emily sat frozen, staring at the notebook in her trembling hands. The rain outside tapped against the windows, the only sound in the otherwise silent house. Daniel had written her name, Claire, over and over again. And that one haunting note should have told her. She inhaled sharply. Flipping through more pages, searching for anything that might explain the connection. Then, she found it. A phone number. No name. No explanation. Just a number written in the same ink, slightly smudged, as if Daniel had hesitated before writing it down. Her heart pounded. Could this be Claire's number? For a moment, fear gripped her. Did she really want to know the truth? But then she pictured the little girl standing at Daniel's grave, her innocent eyes filled with something unspoken. Yes. She needed to know. With a deep breath, Emily grabbed her phone and dialed the number. It rang once. Twice. 3 times. Then, a voice. Soft. Hesitant. Female. Hello. Emily's throat went dry. She gripped the phone tighter. Is this Claire? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. A long silence. Then, the woman on the other end inhaled sharply. Who is this? Emily swallowed hard. My name is Emily. I was Daniel's wife. Another pause. But this time, it was different. When Claire finally spoke, her voice trembled. I was waiting for this call. Emily's breath hitched. Before she could respond, Claire continued. I think it's time you knew the truth. Emily's pulse thundered in her ears. Then Claire said something that sent a chill down her spine. Meet me tomorrow. I'll tell you everything. Click. The line went dead. Emily stared at the phone, her heart racing. Tomorrow, she would finally get her answers. But something told her she wasn't ready for what she was about to uncover. Emily barely slept that night. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with possibilities. Who was Claire? What had she meant by "I was waiting for this call"? And most importantly, what had Daniel been hiding? By morning, exhaustion clung to her, but the adrenaline kept her moving. She dressed quickly, choosing something simple: jeans, a sweater, and her coat. The sky was gray as she drove to the location Claire had texted her. A quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of place she and Daniel would have visited on lazy Sunday mornings. The thought made her chest ache. She pushed open the door, scanning the small room. And then she saw her. Claire. The woman was sitting by the window, her fingers wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. She had dark hair pulled into a loose bun, and her face, pale, nervous, held an eerie familiarity. Emily's breath caught. The resemblance was undeniable. Claire's eyes, deep brown, just like Daniel's, lifted to meet hers. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Claire stood. "Emily." Emily nodded, stepping closer. Claire gestured to the seat across from her. "Please. Sit." Emily hesitated, then slid into the chair. The tension between them was heavy. Thick with unspoken words. "I don't even know where to begin," Claire admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Emily swallowed hard. "Start with the truth." Claire let out a shaky breath. Then, in a voice filled with sorrow, she said, "Daniel was my brother." Emily's mind went blank. "Brother?" She shook her head. "No, that's not possible. Daniel never mentioned a sister." Claire's lips pressed into a thin line. "Because he didn't know." Emily's heart pounded. "What are you saying?" Claire exhaled slowly, gripping her cup. "Daniel and I, we had the same father. But he never told Daniel about me." Emily's hands curled into fists under the table. "So you're saying Daniel had a sister he never knew about?" Claire nodded, her eyes glassy. "He found out a year before he died." A lump formed in Emily's throat. "And he didn't tell me." Claire's voice cracked. "Because he didn't know how." Emily stared at her, the weight of the revelation crashing over her. Daniel had a secret sister. And he had taken the truth to his grave. But why? And what else had he kept hidden? Emily wasn't sure she was ready for the answers. But she had no choice now. She had to know everything. Emily sat frozen, staring at Claire as the words echoed in her mind. Daniel had a sister. And he never knew until a year before he died. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the table. How did he find out? Claire sighed, looking down at her coffee as if the answer lay somewhere in its dark depths. He came looking for our father. Emily's breath hitched. Daniel never talked about his father. He always said he didn't have a relationship with him. Claire nodded. That's because he didn't. Not really. Our father left Daniel's mother when he was just a baby. But he had another family. My family. She paused. And he left us, too. Emily swallowed hard. My mother never spoke about him, Claire continued, her voice laced with quiet pain. She wanted to forget. But when I turned 18, I started looking for answers. That's when I found out about Daniel. I didn't know how to reach him. Until he came looking for our father, just like I had years before. Emily shook her head, trying to piece it together. So Daniel found out about you only a year ago? Claire nodded. He was shocked. Angry, even. He felt betrayed. Like his whole life had been a lie. She gave a sad smile. But then, something changed. He started meeting me in secret. Getting to know me. Emily's chest ached. In secret? Claire hesitated, then nodded. He said he wasn't ready to tell you. That he needed time. Emily's hands trembled. Time. That was something Daniel no longer had. Tears burned in her eyes. So that little girl at the cemetery, Claire's daughter? Claire's face softened. Yes. Her name is Lily. She hesitated. She adored Daniel. Called him Uncle Danny. Emily let out a shaky breath, her mind spinning. Daniel had found a family he never knew existed. He had built a bond with his sister and niece. And yet, he never told her. Why? Claire must have seen the question in her eyes because she spoke again. He was afraid, Emily. Afraid that the truth would hurt you. She exhaled deeply. And I think part of him was scared of what you'd think of him for searching for a father who had abandoned him. Emily's heart twisted. She had always known Daniel carried wounds from his childhood, but she never imagined this. Silence stretched between them before Claire reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. She slid it across the table. "He wrote you this," she whispered. "Before he died." Emily's breath caught. Her fingers hovered over the envelope, her heart pounding. Slowly, she picked it up. Her name was scrawled on the front. Her hands shook as she turned it over, ready to open it. Ready for the truth. Emily's fingers trembled as she held the envelope. Her name was written in Daniel's handwriting, familiar, yet now distant, like a ghost reaching out from the past. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. "Why didn't you give this to me sooner?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Claire hesitated. "I didn't know if I should. I wasn't sure if you'd even want to hear from me. But when I saw you at the grave, I knew you deserved to know." Emily nodded slowly, her pulse hammering in her ears. She took a shaky breath and carefully tore open the envelope. Inside was a single folded piece of paper. Daniel's words. Her heart pounded as she unfolded it and began to read. "My Emily, if you're reading this, it means I never found the right way to tell you. And for that, I'm sorry. I never wanted to keep secrets from you, but this one. I didn't know how to say it. I didn't know how to explain that my entire life, I felt like something was missing. That a part of me had been left behind with a man I never knew. You know how much I hated talking about my father. But one day, something changed. I don't know if it was fear of becoming him or just a need for answers, but I went looking. And what I found was Claire. I have a sister, Emily. A niece. A family I never knew existed. At first, I was angry at my father, angry at fate, angry at the years I lost. But Claire. She didn't deserve my anger. She was searching, too. And somehow, in finding each other, we both became whole. I wanted to tell you. Every day, I wanted to. But I was afraid. Afraid you'd think I was changing. Afraid you'd see me differently. I told myself I'd wait for the right moment. That I'd make it perfect. But life doesn't wait for perfect moments. And now, if you're reading this, it means I ran out of time. Please, Emily. Don't be angry. Claire and Lily, they're good people. They're family. And if nothing else, I hope you'll let them be part of your life. I love you. Always. Daniel." Emily's vision blurred with tears. The paper shook in her hands. He had wanted to tell her. He had tried. But life had stolen the chance from them. A sob broke free from her lips. Claire reached out hesitantly, her own eyes wet. "I know this is a lot," she said gently. "I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted you to know the truth." Emily clutched the letter to her chest, breathing shakily. Daniel was gone. But a part of him lived on. And now, she had a choice to make. Did she shut the door on this chapter of his life? Or did she open herself to the family he had left behind? She didn't have the answer yet. But for the first time since Daniel's death, she felt like she wasn't grieving alone. Emily sat in her car, gripping Daniel's letter in her hands. The paper was slightly crumpled now, worn from her trembling fingers. She had read it 3 times. Each word carved deeper into her heart. "I wanted to tell you. Every day, I wanted to." The regret in his words echoed her own. She glanced at the cemetery entrance in the rearview mirror. A place that had once only been a site of sorrow now felt like a threshold, a gateway to a truth she wasn't sure she was ready to face. Claire's words still lingered. "I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted you to know the truth, but the truth came with weight. She exhaled slowly and turned on the ignition. Not home. Not yet. Instead, she found herself driving toward a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of town, guided by an address scribbled on the back of Daniel's letter. Claire's address. Her heart pounded as she pulled up to the small house. The porch light was on, casting a warm glow. For a moment, she hesitated. Is this what Daniel wanted? A small voice inside her answered, he wanted you to know them. But the choice is yours. Before she could second-guess herself, the front door opened. A small figure stood in the doorway, clutching a worn teddy bear. Lily. The little girl blinked at Emily with wide eyes, then broke into a shy smile. You came. Emily's breath caught. She hadn't spoken. She hadn't knocked. But somehow, Lily knew. And just like that, the door wasn't just a physical barrier anymore. It was an invitation. To step forward. To learn the rest of Daniel's story. To find out if, in all this loss, there was still something left to hold on to. Emily took a deep breath. And stepped inside. The warmth of the house was a stark contrast to the cold night outside. Emily stepped in hesitantly, her eyes scanning the cozy living room. Soft yellow lights glowed against the walls, casting gentle shadows over the furniture. It felt lived in. Safe. Claire stood near the doorway, watching Emily carefully. Come in. Make yourself comfortable. Emily nodded stiffly but didn't sit. Her gaze was drawn to a wooden shelf by the fireplace. It was filled with framed photographs. She walked toward them, heart pounding as her eyes landed on one in particular. Daniel. It was a picture she had never seen before. He looked younger, maybe in his early 20s, standing beside Claire. They were laughing, his arms slung around her shoulders. A brother and sister. A bond he had kept hidden. Emily swallowed hard. When was this taken? Claire stepped beside her. The day we met. He was nervous at first, but once we started talking, it was like we had always known each other. We spent hours just filling in the gaps. She smiled faintly. He called me his little sister, even though I was born just a few months after him. Emily traced a finger along the edge of the frame, a lump forming in her throat. Why didn't he tell me? Claire hesitated. I think he wanted to. He was just scared of how it would change things. Emily let out a shaky breath. It shouldn't have changed anything. But even as she said it, doubt crept in. Would she have understood? Would she have welcomed this part of his past? Or would she have felt betrayed that he had kept something so big from her? Before she could dwell on it, a small voice spoke from behind them. I have something for you. Emily turned to see Lily standing by a small wooden chest, her teddy bear clutched to her side. The little girl lifted the lid and pulled out an old, worn notebook. She held it out with tiny hands. Uncle Daniel said this was special. Emily hesitated before gently taking it. The cover was faded leather, edges frayed from years of use. Her fingers brushed over the name engraved on the front. Daniel Carter. Her breath caught. His journal? Claire nodded. He wrote in it all the time. It helped him make sense of things. Emily's hands trembled as she opened the first page. The words stared back at her. For the ones I love, and the ones I've lost, her heart clenched. Somewhere in these pages, Daniel's voice still lived. And maybe, just maybe, the answers she had been searching for were waiting inside. Emily's fingers trembled as she traced the faded ink on the first page of Daniel's journal. His handwriting, familiar yet distant, felt like a whisper from the past. Claire and Lily watched quietly as she turned the page. August 12th, I met my sister today. Emily's breath hitched. I never thought this moment would come. I never let myself believe it. But there she was, standing right in front of me. Looking so much like my mother that I thought I was dreaming. A lump formed in Emily's throat as she read on. I wish I could tell Emily. She deserves to know. But how do you tell the person you love that your past isn't what they thought? That there's a whole part of your life you never shared, not because you didn't trust them, but because you were afraid of losing them. Emily clenched the journal, her chest tightening. He had wanted to tell her. He had been afraid. Afraid of losing me? Claire placed a gentle hand on Emily's arm. There's more. Emily nodded and turned the page. December 4th, I don't have much time left, her breath caught. The room felt suddenly smaller. The doctors told me I should prepare. But how do you prepare for something like this? I don't care about myself, I just want Emily to be okay. I want her to know she was my greatest love. My home. Emily's vision blurred with tears. And I want Claire and Lily to know that even though I didn't have much time with them, they meant the world to me too. A single tear slipped down her cheek. I hope, one day, Emily and Claire will meet. Maybe they can help each other heal. Maybe they can be family. Emily pressed the journal to her chest, a sob escaping her lips. Claire reached out, her own eyes wet. He wanted us to find each other. Emily nodded, swallowing back the grief that threatened to consume her. She looked at Lily, who was watching her with big, knowing eyes. Maybe, just maybe, Daniel had left her one last gift. A family she never knew she had. And a chance to finally heal. Emily sat in silence, the weight of Daniel's words settling deep in her heart. The journal rested in her lap, its pages filled with memories, fears, and love, so much love. For her. For Claire. For Lily. She wiped her tears and looked up. Claire sat across from her, waiting, her expression uncertain. Lily, sensing the heavy emotions in the room, curled up beside her mother, hugging her teddy bear. For the first time, Emily truly saw them, not as strangers, not as an unsettling reminder of a past she didn't know, but as part of Daniel's story. A part he had always wanted her to have. She took a deep breath. He wanted us to be a family. Claire's eyes shimmered. Yes. Emily let the words settle between them. There was still grief, still pain, but something else was emerging, something softer. Hope. She glanced back at the journal, flipping to the last entry. March 21st, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. But I don't want this to be the end. Life moves forward, even when it feels impossible. Emily, don't be afraid to keep living. Love again. Laugh. Be happy. And if you ever feel alone, remember, you never are. You have Claire now. And Lily. And a world still waiting for you. A sob broke from Emily's lips. But this time, it wasn't just sadness. It was release. She looked at Claire, then at Lily, who smiled up at her. Are you sad? The little girl asked softly. Emily wiped her eyes and managed a small smile. A little. Lily scooted closer, reaching out her tiny hand. Mommy says hugs help. Something in Emily's heart cracked open. She reached out, and as Lily's little arms wrapped around her, warmth spread through her chest. Daniel was gone, but he had left something behind. A sister. A niece. A chance for healing. A new beginning. And for the first time in a long time, Emily felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone after all.